jumping back into the show and into our next segment here, we're talking about awards. We're talking about who is in my final picks for these awards, the predictions that I have after now knowing everything about the regular season. We've gone through the entire thing and through different discussions on really the MVP because that dominates the award talk right all year long, but there's been a lot of tight competition, really in a lot of spots where the offensive player of the year was tight. The comeback, or not the comeback player of the year, the offensive rookie of the year really took an exciting turn. At some point this season, and there's been a lot of great performances, right, statistically, and some of the guys that go unnoticed also to be included in these discussions is has made these picks pretty difficult for a lot of these spots. But I've got, how many do I got? One, two, three, four, five, seven. I got seven awards here, and there's other ones that were, I guess not as talked about, like special teams player of the year, most underrated player of the year, catch of the year, something like that. I didn't include those in here just for time purposes, so I just stuck to the main ones, obviously. These seven awards, I went through and I predicted my winners, and I also gave a runner up because, like I said, it was pretty close this year because of a lot of great performances individually and as a team. So, without further ado, talking about our first award here, we got the Defensive Player of the Year that I thought should go to the Broncos cornerback, Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain, I have him as my Defensive Player of the Year. I thought that Trey Hendrickson made a really good case to be the Defensive Player of the Year, but in the end, I went with Pat. Because their defense, he's one of the guys that, like I just briefly said, he's one of the guys that kind of goes unnoticed, right? Unless, for whatever reason, quarterbacks are throwing to him a lot, and they probably shouldn't. That's really the only time you see him on your screen, or maybe making a tackle or something like that in a running play. But for the majority of the time this season, nobody's really looking at his side of the field and trying to throw it there consecutively because they understand that it wouldn't really go well for them if they decided to go towards Pat Surtain. And the pass rush is and has been a huge part of the Broncos defense so far this year and how dominant they look. But as much as the pass rush has helped the coverage in a lot of instances, the coverage from Pat Surtain and really the entire secondary has also helped out that pass rush a lot because, if you get a pass rush there quickly, it obviously makes it look like the corners are really covering very well because the quarterback can't get the ball out in time because he has somebody in his face. But for other times where a quarterback's just sitting back there and he's got a pretty clean pocket, if the secondary is doing its job, you have the quarterback dancing around back there and not really having a place to throw it, then it makes the pass rush, it helps them out a lot more. So I thought that's a great example to use here with Pat and how he pretty much closes off a whole side of the field. So now you not only help out your pass rush, but you're really limiting them to a certain part of the field. And those guys over there are really good as well with Riley Moss and McMillan and those guys. So they've done a very good job of that. And in terms of numbers, Pat Surtain's been thrown at this year only about 10 or 11% of his snaps. And that's the second lowest among defensive backs in the NFL this year, with at least 250 snaps recorded. And in man coverage, he's been in that about 41% of the time. And he's recorded 4 interceptions. One was a huge pick six in one of their games, I believe against the Raiders. And really, you go all year. He's gone all year with no missed tackles. And it might not seem like a huge thing, but for corners, that's usually one of their weak points. And Pat not only brings the coverage, but clearly is willing to get in there and tackle. So that's a huge thing. And his work just goes unnoticed, I think. So I like that about this award and kind of rewarding someone like Pat Surtain in that regard. So to me, he was my Defensive Player of the Year for the regular season this year. Then, looking to our next award, we got the Offensive Player of the Year, and it obviously had to go to Saquon, but you look at other guys like, Joe had a fantastic year. Joe had an unreal year. Derrick Henry obviously had a pretty monster year, but a couple he's done it a couple times where he's put up ridiculous numbers, so it might not be that impressive. And then you obviously have Jamar Chase. He literally won the Triple Crown. So that's, in terms of history, only 5 other guys have done something like that. And he, along with Joe, were huge parts as to why we even talked about the Bengals, right? If one or both of them weren't on that team, they would be like down there with like the Pats and the Titans, I believe, right? With how bad they played everywhere else. Really, it was a lot of Jamar and Joe Burrow. But Saquon, to be that close to the Eric Dickerson record and the rushing record, I think it trumps Jamar Chase's Triple Crown. Because, we're talking about 5 other guys with Jamar, and we're only talking about one other guy with Eric Dickerson there in the rushing record. So I thought that kind of trumped the Triple Crown there at least a little bit. And, just looking at it in terms of value, what he added to the Eagles, they were already talented. They were already had some of the best players in each position around the NFL. But then to add a guy like Saquon, a lot of the times this year it's looked very unfair. It's looked like there was no way anybody could really try and stop any part of this team, right? If you try and stop Saquon, he was still going to do his thing. And then if you're trying so hard to stop him, then A.J. Brown's going off, Devontae Smith going off. And if you try and focus on them, then Saquon, just destroys you with breaking off like a 50 or 70-yard run and just ending the game just like that. Consecutively, he put up big numbers as well. And I think the ability that he has on his own, along with that offensive line that they have in Philadelphia, constantly just made Saquon a threat, right? You couldn't doze off for a player too because, like I said, he could just break one off and then everything's out the window. So I think that big playability, the constant threat of him, and how much he's added to an Eagles team that was all very, very good, to bring them to an even better level that we've seen so far this year, I thought that was enough for me. So I gave it a Saquon. I'm still mad he didn't break the rushing record, that the Eagles didn't let him do that, but he'll get this award, and I think he's very deserving of it. Then, after the Offensive Player of the Year, we got the Coach of the Year that I believe is going to be Kevin O'Connell. There's been a lot said about Dan Campbell, and I think he's a great coach as well. I think Jim Harbaugh would be my number 2, though, for really the main reason that is all these teams are good, and I think the Vikings and the Lions are obviously better than the Chargers in terms of who they have at their disposal. But to me, that's one part of the puzzle, right? That's only one aspect of it, right? Then you get into another area where, all right, you kind of eliminate the Chargers out of this, right? And I think it really came down to Dan Campbell and Kevin O'Connell for a lot of people. And you look at talented rosters everywhere. You look at the play calling individually is great for both of them. But to me, where I find the difference in both of them is, like, Kevin O'Connell, obviously a great head coach, and obviously has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and all those guys at his disposal. But when you look at a guy like him and what, his situation is in Minnesota, to bring them to a 14-win record and be that close to winning the entire, division and conference, I think is a huge accomplishment. But also the fact that you did it with Sam Darnold, a guy that nobody ever predicted that he was going to be in the situation. Once it became official that Sam was going to be, the quarterback, nobody was thinking 14-win season. And that has a lot to do with Kevin O'Connell. And, compared to the Lions, right, you had Aaron Glenn, you had Ben Johnson, not to take away from the job that Dan Campbell does, because I think it's a lot. But Kevin, there's nobody going after the offensive coordinator for the Vikings. The defensive coordinator for the Vikings, Brian Flores is one, but you didn't have it on both sides like Dan Campbell did. And I think the job he's done with him, this offense, and getting to a 14-win season, where last year they were pretty good, right, with Kirk Cousins. Unfortunately, he got hurt, but they were still showing signs that they were going to be very good. But then this year, to get that much better with a quarterback that really wasn't penciled in to be the starter one and to kind of have the season that he's had, making a Pro Bowl, I think a lot of that has to go to Kevin O'Connell. So I thought that was a more impressive feat than, say, Dan Campbell or Jim Harbaugh. So I went with Kevin O'Connell for my Coach of the Year. Then the next award was pretty obvious. Comeback Player of the Year, I went with Joe. Not much to say about Joe. He could be in that conversation with MVP, right? That conversation's been brought up a lot. But the team record is obviously not helping his case. So last year he went down with that wrist injury, and now coming back this year and having the best season of his career makes it so much more hurtful that he's not in the playoffs. But I mean, it is what it is now. And, I had J.K. Dobbins in here as my second, as my runner-up. But Joe really ran away with this award towards the latter portion of the season where they had to go out there and win. And every game it looked like he was throwing for like 300 and 3 touchdowns. Jamar Chase benefited off of it as well. So I think Joe is very deserving of this. He's in the conversation for Offensive Player of the Year as well. But with that going to Saquon, I felt like this award had to go to Joe because he definitely deserves one this year. Then we move on to the Rookie Awards. For the Defensive Rookie of the Year, I had Chop Robinson. I had Jared Verse at some point this year. I want to say through the midway point of the season, I had Jared Verse. But after a while, he kind of dozed off a little bit. He wasn't really making as much plays as he did in the first half of the season. So I kind of went with Chop Robinson because, I looked into some other articles and some other reports and sources on, what this competition was looking like. And I wasn't aware that after about a month into the season, all the way until the end of it, he had a 15.5 pressure rate since the end of October up until now. And that was only second to Myles Garrett. And only because he had 6 sacks this year, it's not really so eye-popping. But other defensive rookies compared to him and don't really stand out too much. This one was an award that it could go to a couple guys. I wanted to give it to maybe someone like Jarian Cooper for the Packers, but he didn't really have too much to back it up like Chop Robinson. So the fact that there was no Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips also were out this year, we got to see a lot of him. And because of that, because of some of the stats, I decided to give him the award, with Jared Verse coming in second for me. Then the second to last award here I have is Offensive Rookie of the Year. It made it close a little bit with Brock Bowers and Bo Nix, obviously, but I think Jaden has done it really the entire course of the season, and really after the first couple weeks, really in that first game against the Bengals, and then from that point on, the run that they went on with him and how accurate he was and how really he looked so polished and ready for this moment, I had to give the award to Jaden Daniels. I had Brock Bowers coming in second, but again, the overall team success of it all, Jaden Daniels is in the playoffs and has a good opportunity to move on with his first-round matchup. So he made the Pro Bowl. He's already probably considered one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC, and it all culminates with the year that he had as a rookie. So I thought giving this award to him was adequately appropriate. So now we get to the last award, right? The MVP, Lamar or Josh Allen, right? That's the question. I'm going to stick with Josh. I'm pretty sure I had Josh all year. I know I had him in the midseason portion of this, but really to me it just comes down to the fact that I don't like saying that the recency bias is... Obviously, it's an actual thing that happens with voters, right? Lamar's won 2 already. The recency bias and the fact that are we going to give Lamar a third one, right, when Josh Allen's had a good season as well? Because I don't like to diminish what Josh Allen has meant to the Bills this season and what kind of job he's done as well. But I think a point that's really significant in this argument is the fact that, the Bills were really not supposed to be this good. I don't think many had them as the number 2 seed. Maybe a couple people out there had them winning their division, right? But nobody really had them performing the way they did, and he was really at the center of it all. In a year where, Stephon Diggs leaves, and now we're really going to know what this offense was made of. Was it really about Josh, or was it really so much dependent on Stephon Diggs? And Josh Allen has blown those expectations out of the water. The numbers also speak for themselves, and I think also, obviously Lamar can't control how people view this, but having Derrick Henry be added to your team already, in a season where you won the MVP and then you bring on Derrick Henry, we took away a player like that from Josh Allen, right? They took away Stephon Diggs, and still he put this offense on his back, and they were really flourishing under him. So to me, I think that's very significant in that regard, and I think Josh Allen has done more than enough to win the MVP this year. It could have gone to a lot of people, right? If Joe was in the playoffs, I might go to Joe Burrow, but I think Josh, to me, has definitely played at a different level this year. For a long time, he wasn't turning the ball over really at all, and I think that's another example of the growth that he's shown this year. So I went with that. I went with Josh Allen. It's going to be very close regardless, but I think he's done enough to kind of win over the majority of the votes going into a week or two before the Super Bowl, when we're going to officially know who's won what award. But for us on this show, we're going to go to a quick break here, and when we return, we have one more segment to get to, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and how they're stumbling into the playoffs. Are they the worst team in this year's playoffs, and are they going to go into another one-and-done scenario like they did and have been doing over the last previous seasons? We're going to answer that when we return in just a few seconds.